fifth grade. Today for poetry, we're going to be reading a poem entitled Evening on the Lawn by Gary Soto. We're still reading out of the grouping of poems that revolve around the theme of growing up. Sometimes we feel like the adults in our lives just don't get us because our perspectives and perceptions are so different. They don't get watching for shooting stars for hours. They don't get why figuring out song lyrics matter, or how someone can spend a whole day in their bedroom drawing or reading, or worst of all, daydreaming. In Evening on the Lawn, Gary Soto tells a story that measures the difference between the adult he felt himself becoming and the perspectives of the adults he lived with who didn't get it. Follow along with me as I read. Evening on the Lawn. I sat on the lawn watching the half-hearted moon rise, the gnats orbiting the peach pit that I spat out, when the sweetness was gone. I was 20, wet behind the ears from my car wash job, and suddenly rising to my feet when I saw in early evening a cloud roll over a section of stars. It was boiling, a cloud, churning in one place and washing those 3 or 4 stars. Excited, I lay back down, my stomach a valley, my arms twisted with new rope, my hair a youthful black. I called my mother and stepfather and said something amazing was happening up there. They shaded their eyes from the porch light. They looked and looked before my mom turned the garden hose onto a rose bush, and my stepfather scolded the cat to get the heck off the car. The old man grumbled about missing something on TV. The old lady made a face when mud splashed her slippers. "How you bother," she said for the last time, the screen door closing like a sigh. I turned off the porch light, undid my shoes. The cloud boiled over those stars until it was burned by their icy fire. The night was now clear. The wind brought me a scent of a place where I would go alone, then find others, all barefoot. In time, each of us would boil clouds and strike our childhood houses with lightning. All right, guys, here's what I want you to do when you go back into this poem. I want you to comment on the lines and words that surprised you, plus anything else that Gary Soto did here as a poet. Before you go back in, though, I want to point out just a few things. When it says, I sat on the lawn watching the half-hearted moonrise, this is figurative language. This is kind of insinuating that the moon is rising slowly. That's why it says half-hearted, because if it were to throw its whole heart in it, then all of its energy would be involved in that. So it's just figurative language to kind of describe what the poet's seeing and experiencing. The other thing that I wanted to point out is just how descriptive this language is and how beautiful the diction in this poem is, which is the words that he uses. The gnats orbiting the peach pit I spat out. I can see that. I can see that because of the way that this poet describes that. So it's very, very, very descriptive and specific. I'm not sure if you will know what this expression means, but again, this is figurative language. Wet behind the ears from my car wash job. This is a phrase or expression used to describe someone who's new or just a baby at something. Wet behind the ears means new or very young or just getting started, okay? So he was 20, which means he graduated from high school. He just started a car wash job. So clearly he's living with his parents still. But he's old enough to be out on his own if he wanted to be, okay? I just also want to point out these words: roll, boiling, churning. I just think that they're a really amazing way to describe what's going on with the clouds and the stars in the sky that he's observing. And then I also want to point out this description, youthful black. He's describing his hair. He's a very young man, okay? And he's I think when he wrote this, he wasn't necessarily a young man, but he was reflecting back to this time. And so when he describes himself, he's making sure that he accentuates the fact that he was a very young man and he was very youthful. So his hair was a youthful black, no gray had crept into his head of hair at this point. And then also when he was talking about my stomach a valley, my arms twisted with new rope. Okay, I don't know that this happens to everyone, but when people age, sometimes it becomes more difficult to stay physically fit. And so he's describing his stomach when he was young and when he was 20 years old, that it was a valley, so it was flat. He was skinny. And then it says, my arms twisted with new rope. So he's describing the muscle definition in his arms by comparing it. It's actually a metaphor by saying that they are twisted new rope. If you've ever seen rope, it looks like two strands woven around each other, and it creates kind of a bump, bump, bump kind of texture and even appearance. And so he is describing his arms by saying that they are twisted new rope. So he's got some muscle definition. They're not old guy arms. Okay. I wanted to also point out the simile that he uses when he describes the way that the screen door closed. The screen door closing like a sigh. I love this so much. I can see and hear this screen door closing because of the way he describes it using this simile. So it's kind of one of those doors that would kind of be like, okay, that sound effect was crummy and terrible. I apologize. I am no good at the sound effects, but I think you might get what I'm trying to describe here. And then if you look at this last part, by the way, we have all one stanza here, one continuous stanza. So he didn't really create a form. It's just all together making his point one line at a time. If we look at this part where it starts, the night was now clear. The wind brought me a scent of a place where I would go alone, then find others all barefoot. In time, each of us would boil clouds and strike our childhood houses with lightning. Okay, he's being silly here a little bit, okay? There's humor, but there's also a touch of anger here as well. The humor comes in when he says, a place where I would go alone to find others all barefoot. In time, each of us would boil clouds. He's saying, I'm going to go find some people who are like me, who appreciate, taking my shoes off and walking across the lawn in the evening and laying out there watching clouds boil. He's going to go find other young people to build his life with. And that's generally what happens. You establish friendships or relationships, and they become your peer group. Some of them some of those peers end up getting married, things like that. And so he's going to go seek out more people who are like him, and he's going to build his life around them. And then the part that's kind of humorous, but also a little bit angry is, in time, each of us would boil clouds and strike our childhood houses with lightning. Okay, this is poking fun at the fact that his parents did not understand his daydreaming and laying out on the lawn and watching the stars and the clouds. But it also shows that anger or irritation with the fact that they just don't understand him. So he's got a little bit of resentment also. It's not it's not intentional. He's not going to really go back and strike revenge or anything like that. It's just a conclusion, like, letting you know that he feels misunderstood and he's a little bit annoyed by it. And remember that Gary Soto wrote this poem probably when he was older, okay? And he was remembering this time in his life. So he is kind of making light of his ideals from his youth, but he's also making a point that we feel misunderstood when we go through that time in our life, and sometimes we just think they don't get it, and we're going to come back and do so much better. But the reality is, when we actually do get out of the house and become grown-ups, we learn a whole lot. And one of the things that we learn is that those adults in our life, maybe they didn't understand spending our time that way, but they understood a whole lot of stuff that we at that point in our lives didn't. So I know that's pretty heavy stuff for 5th grade and thinking about growing up, but it's important to remember that when you move from childhood to adulthood, it means defining yourself. Sometimes that means comparing and contrasting the personal identity you're defining with that of the people around you, including your parents. At some junctures, there may not be a close fit between what you find yourself caring about and what your significant adults do. These points of tension are also subjects for poems about growing up. So guys, just to recap, I want you to go back in and mark any lines or words or phrases that you found surprising, and then anything else that Gary Soto did here that you like as a poet. And then remember that sometimes as we're defining our identity or we're figuring out who we are, sometimes our ideas don't always mesh, or we may find some controversy when we talk with the adults in our life. That doesn't mean that those relationships are not good. All relationships are strained at certain points, and it's kind of how we figure things out or work things out. So just keep that in mind. Love you guys and miss you, and I can't wait to see you soon. Reach out if you have any questions or you need anything at all. Bye.